Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have a great session lined up for you today. Before we get started, there are just a few general housekeeping points to cover. First and foremost, please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and we will share them with our speakers. Second, if you experience any technical difficulties today, please use the same question tool, and a member of our admin team will be on hand to support you. And finally, just to note, this session is being recorded, and we'll share a copy of the recording with you via email in the coming days. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our speakers to get us started.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So today we're going to be talking about unleashing the power of AI and integrations. It sounds very exciting, and we're here today to make sure that it becomes something more tangible for you and something that you can actually take action on. So before we get started into the interesting stuff, a brief round of introductions. So together with me today to present this webinar is my colleague Margot. Margot, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, nice to meet you. I've been looking after lawyers and AI for many, many years, and I've been speaking to many and hearing their experiences like yourselves who have either struggles with implementation of AI or would like to get started on a journey and don't know how to do it. So I'm planning to share a few journeys with you today, some experiences, and hopefully it will resonate. Maurits, over to you.
Very good, thank you, Margot. So yeah, my name is Maurits Annegarn. I work for Wolters Kluwer as a Senior Manager Legal Technology out of the Netherlands. And I also lead a team of integration specialists. So while Margot takes care of the AI side, I will be taking care of the integration side of our story today. Moving on, a little bit about Wolters Kluwer for those who aren't familiar. Wolters Kluwer is a large international organization based out of the Netherlands. With over 19,000, probably 20,000 by now, employees worldwide, and major divisions in health, tax and accounting, governance, risk and compliance, ESG as well now. It's one of our newest divisions, not on this slide yet, as well as legal and regulatory, which is the division that Margot and I are part of, more specifically legal software. So what we do is we make software specifically for legal departments and for law firms to manage all of their day-to-day activities, whether it is the very simple mundane all the way up to the very complex and complicated. So a little bit about how you joined our organization, Margot. Della is a recent acquisition that was done by Wolters Kluwer at the end of last year and is available as a powerful standalone AI solution for legal departments. But we've also integrated Della into our own legal management platform, Legisway, allowing all of our customers to better handle the challenges of legal departments in 2023 and beyond. And there really are quite a few challenges. It is really a time of pervasive and perpetual change with new pressures on the profession. Well, not necessarily new, but they are ever increasing, both on the geopolitical and economic scale, but primarily focused for the legal departments on the regulatory aspect as well as the talent aspect, becoming a larger challenge than it has ever been. And before the COVID crisis, the legal sector was already undergoing some of these transformations driven by external forces, but we now see that this has been further turbocharged over the last couple of years with an increased intensity across the board. And this definitely adds to the complexity of managing a legal department specifically. These extreme pressures on legal departments, as I mentioned, they've been intensifying, adding to the workload, but also at the same time, we're seeing that there's tighter budget for legal departments. So in order to overcome these challenges, they need to be able to improve on legal operations and legal project management while managing the growing demands of the organization. At the same time, also influencing change on law firms. So combine all of this together, legal departments need to invest more in technology, and they are investing more in technology and expecting the same from their law firms as well. But doing all of this becomes a little bit of a challenge when you look at the specific knowledge levels that are present. Because we can see that some of these specific tech challenges, and this information comes from research that we've done over the last couple of years. We see that for a large amount of legal departments, they don't fully understand yet the benefit of technology for their departments. That's something that we hope to increase a little bit here today. At the same time, for those that have technology solutions available, they don't really understand how to best leverage it within their organization or how to fully deploy it. So that's just a brief introduction on why we are hosting this specific webinar. Because we see that as organizations increasingly rely on technology, that lack of preparedness related to the investments that they may have already done can have a significant impact on the future effectiveness of legal departments. Before we start talking about why AI and why integrations are so great for managing contracts in a better way and gaining that efficiency for legal departments, I think it's maybe, and for some of you here today, this will be old news, but we always like to start with a quick lesson in AI to make sure that everybody is talking about the same thing here today. Over to you, Margot.
Thank you. So I thought let's start with the first slide to talk about AI, how it works, to make sure that we are all on the same page. We start from singing from the same hymn sheet. But to be fair, this slide beautifully exemplifies how AI is building its connections, putting them into clusters, and understand what it should do. But then I decided that it's a bit too complex and we don't really need to understand that at all. Most of us on the call today will be driving a car, but do we really know how the engine is built? I don't think so. I'm personally not interested, and the more automation I get, the better. I'm just caring about getting from point A to point B safely. So I think most of us, especially some of you, will be at the beginning of the journey now. So let's move on to the next slide and start a bit earlier, a bit easier. This slide is quite a similar one, if you believe it or not, but just breaking it down a little bit better. It shows in a nutshell what AI models actually do and how they are being built. In simple terms, AI typically evaluates examples in order to put them in particular brackets for us. The more examples it sees, the better it addresses the questions. So in terms of legal embeddings, that will be looking for not only words, clauses, structures, it will evaluate a lot of different examples. So with that background, I want to start with this quiz and a question to you. Where would you put an apple looking at the icon? I'm not going to give you too much time because it's a simple task. So if you have decided that B and D is the right answer, I'm really concerned and we need to talk and be fully focused during this session. If you've gone for A quickly because you thought this the shape is round, you might have be okay roughly on the kind of first lookout, purely because if there are no examples, automatically you will look at shapes. However, if you look a bit deeper, and AI is looking deeper than that, you will notice that there are no correlation between apple and balls. So apple isn't bouncy, you cannot or you shouldn't kick it, but you really will feel that C is the right answer because it has plenty ingredients in common. It's a fruit, it can be grown in natural surroundings, it may not look the same, but it can be eaten and many more. So you see, if you start to evaluate where apple actually belongs, you know as a human that it's definitely C. But the AI needs to see many, many examples for it in order to understand. The same in law. AI is not only looking at words when evaluating contracts. That's why it's so helpful, because it goes much deeper for you and it can serve as a very helpful tool So it will evaluate words, concepts, different structures, and we know lawyers write things differently. They don't write contracts in the same way. They don't put clause A in the same structure for all their contracts. It's all mix and match. The same with AI and law, the same here. Can I have next slide, Moritz, please? So all of that is based on quite a simple term as a concept, natural language processing. There is plenty of complexity going in the background, but we as lawyers don't really have to care about that unless we are geeky engineers. It's another story. But for our purposes, NLP is simply a process of understanding natural human language. So whatever you think, whatever you say, AI is trying to understand that and replicate it. And as mentioned, various elements are being constructed, and the more example it sees, the better. But one big thing I want to highlight for you today, it is assisted legal document review tool. If you decide to use AI for contract reviews, it cannot be unsupervised, it cannot be left alone. And I will give you some examples why it is so. In the next slide, there is one example of Asian pear. It is called pear, but if you look at it, it looks like an apple. I'm sure you would agree. I personally had the pleasure to taste it, and it does taste like a pear with a bit of a citrusy flavor. And it's also called Asian apple, sometimes referred to as apple pear fruit. Why I'm talking about this here in relation to law is because as a human, if I ask you today, where would you put it into our buckets? Would you put it into bucket A with apples or bucket B with pears? And I'm quite sure, I actually don't know. I'm not gonna ask Maurice because he is deeply thinking now. So I think he might be also unsure. There is no black and white. There is no answer A or B for this instance. And so please be wary that AI works and thinks in the same matter. If we can't decide sometimes, if it is a vague situation, a bit of a gray area, that's the same for AI. That's why it should be assisted review. But on another note, let's remember when it takes all these aspects into consideration in law, for example, employment contracts, all of us have employment contracts in place, for most of us. And if you ask AI to evaluate and answer what are the bonuses that employee is receiving, it will not only bring you a salary amount, it will bring you benefits, maybe commission, maybe reference to company car, for some more lucky ones, access to a private jet. But in recent weeks, years, months, we've seen more reference to shares in the company being considered a bonus, but it's not referred as a bonus as such typically, but AI will again evaluate it and seeing more and more examples bring it to you. So let's remember it can be quite powerful because it sees a lot of examples, it considers a lot of aspects, analyze documents deeply, but then it needs to be treated as an assisted tool because it's not all black and white. Moritz, over to
Margot,
you.
would you say that it's accurate that it's really all about having that, first of all, that categorization well done, but also with context associated with it, right? So you need both elements in order to get a decent result, and then it still requires a human review to make sure that both context and categorization are accurate.
Absolutely right. So the first way to review legal contracts with AI is definitely giving it a run on its own, but then making sure that you don't share the results with your final client or treat it as a final way. Treat it as an assistant and make sure you supervise the results.
Yeah, we've seen examples of that, of course. What happens if you don't check what comes out of an AI and you submit it to your clients? I believe recently in the US, someone was disassociated from the bar for sending out a paper with references that didn't actually exist. So it's a good example of always double checking the work. I was actually thinking that these look delicious and I should definitely try them at some point. I've never had one, so very curious. Before we dive a little bit more into the examples of improvements that AI and integrations can bring to your contract lifecycle management, I want to talk a little bit about the history that we've gone through. And with history, I don't mean before the year 2000. I'm really talking about the last 10 to 15 years. What we've seen with the contract lifecycle is that there is a lot of complexity involved with it. There are a lot of steps and elements that need to be taken during a contract lifecycle. Sometimes it sounds so easy and so simple. Hey, just create a contract, you have it signed, and that's it. But there's actually a lot of minor steps involved with it. Each of them can be assessed individually and take a look at whether efficiencies can be gained there. So in order to understand how AI can impact the contract lifecycle and how integrations can impact contract lifecycle management, we need to understand what all these individual steps are. And this isn't even an exhaustive list, but it is already giving you a good overview. So during the creation phase, we have how the requests come in, templating, authoring. We have the review phase where the contract's being reviewed, but there's also a level of negotiations and amendments taking place, and how do we take care of those? Approvals, so the contract approval itself, but it might be an advisory process for some kinds of contracts. And how do we deal with rejections in this phase? These are all things that you can think of and analyze within your own organization to see if there's efficiencies that can be gained, either from technology or from better policies. Sometimes the use of as little technology as possible is also a great solution. Execution phase, how do we sign things, how do we initiate obligations, and how do we extract relevant information from the process, and then finally managing it, the actual life of the contract after it's executed. So how do we deal with obligations, how do we deal with reporting, and how do we deal with amendments and renewals? So these are all tiny little facets of the contract lifecycle, and each of these can be impacted in some way by technology, by process, by people involved. And if we look at a very classical example, manual contract lifecycle, and we take these major steps of creating, reviewing, approving, executing, and managing, we look at how this is done before the introduction of technology. We see that in the creation phase, one of the things that causes a lot of issues is there's no single source of truth for your template. So when you're creating a document, sure, nobody's drafting a contract completely by hand much anymore. I mean, unless you're opening a new line of business, but even then you'll definitely use some template as a starting point. But there's the risk of many different templates living in an organization and people using different ones to create a draft document. Then we go into the negotiation and review phase. And I think this is something that a lot of you will recognize or still deal with today. You email it with version 1 and it comes back, and you basically get this back and forth via email where you get all these nice version numbers until you have a title that looks a little bit like this. Definitely final version this time. But you will get to a final agreed document. I mean, there's no scenario here where we're not getting to a final signed contract. It's just the pain along the way that we're talking about. Getting to the approval phase can now be challenging as well for several reasons. First of all, if you didn't use the right template, you might have issues here. You don't necessarily have the data to understand which people need to be involved for an approval. And a lot of changes may have happened during the review phase that cause a little bit of chaos in this process here, going back and forth between different people, but you will finally get the job done. The execution part, I mean, now I'm going to show you a very old scenario. I think, especially since COVID, most of us are used to now and comfortable and trusting of e-signatures. But there was a time in the past, and some of you may remember this, when people used to print it out, take it to their desk, spill coffee on it, print another version, sign it, send it out, send it back, and basically getting signatures done on a contract could take absolutely days or sometimes even weeks. And then finally, the management part in a classical situation is, well, if we're lucky, shared folders, right? But I'm quite sure there's still companies out there, and we sometimes still do engage with them, where it's just thrown in a box or sent to the legal department in the vague hope that somebody does something with it someday. This is the old scenario. We've been working very hard as Wolters Kluwer and as legal software in particular with products like Legisway and like Della to get to a more digitalized contract lifecycle management. A scenario where a central repository makes sure that the right single managed template is fed with data to create a draft document. This already helps because the document is pre-approved by legal, it contains the right wording, it contains the accurate data, so no more party names that are vaguely described instead of the actual legal name, for example, which will help in the review process. With collaborative document review solutions being used to work together collaboratively at the same time without sending emails back and forth, you get to a much faster result. So you have that final PDF that gets sent out for approval. And because we have our data and because we have our approved templates and this clear review process, approvals can be automatically assigned and easily executed simultaneously or in a specific order, with also rejections having automatic results. Right, so say, for example, somebody in finance rejects a contract because it passes a certain threshold value. Systems can be set up in such a way that if that happens, it automatically flows back into the right step of the process so that no time is lost in taking next actions. Finally, get to the digital signatures. I mean, I think everybody's a fan of these. There's no way not to be a fan of them. It speeds up your processes so much. And as those with a more financial background here will know, the faster you close a deal, the bigger your recognized revenue in the year, and the happier your stakeholders in the organizations will be. Finally, having all of this flow back into your central repository, fully searchable, and basically having all that data feed back into your system will make sure that when it's time for following up on obligations, making sure that you're not missing a termination date or a renewal date, and being able to send out those amendments or an extension letter or a termination letter on time will help you in that process going back into the cycle. But even this scenario, which is already for some organizations still something they're working on, and it's also okay if you don't have every facet covered, but there are still inefficiencies in this process. And they are primarily oriented around the how data flows in and out of the central repository. So you get the data into the system, how to deal with external paper, so contracts coming from outside of your organization, and how review is done. And this is really what we're going to be talking about today. Like today, any integration or any data that needs to go from your CRM system, so your sales environments, into your legal repository or vice versa, it's manual activity. Anytime there is outside paper coming into your organization, somebody needs to type that data manually into a system to get that metadata. Review always takes multiple people going back and forth. And if you need help, you need to get time from somebody else in your organization. Same goes for any data that from a financial perspective on the execution, after the execution phase. If any data needs to go to your finance system, your SAP or your Microsoft Dynamics or your ERP system, that's another manual activity. Somebody's typing that information into another system. Or if you need the data from your ERP to draft contracts, such as supplier lists, for example, once again, somebody sitting behind a computer manually typing over that information with all issues that potentially has. This is something that we believe needs to change as well, right? Because manual actions to extract data from contract documents, it can take hours every week. On average, if somebody that's trained in reading contracts, if you give them an average, let's say 20-page contract, it'll take them at least 20 minutes to extract the relevant operational metadata from that contract, at least. And that's generally when they've already done a couple and they're up to speed. So imagine doing that for an X amount of contracts every week, and you can imagine how much time that takes. Fully manual contract review, well, it is time consuming. It can be tedious, not always. I mean, if it's a very interesting big deal contract, it can be a lot of fun, right? To spend time on that. But if you're doing your 25th NDA of the day, yeah, tedious is the right word. And then finally, the duplication of data between your CRM systems, ERP systems, and your contract lifecycle management system. It's time consuming. It has a high chance of mistakes. It's absolutely boring. There are definitely people that absolutely love doing that work, but for most people, it's considered boring and really not what you went to law school for in general, right? And it's very difficult to motivate others in your organization to do it for you. So if you expect your sales teams to, after they've closed their deal, they already have everything in Salesforce to then log into your legal system and type that same information in once again, I mean, unless you can make it so that management tells them to do it as part of their performance reviews, I think you're going to have a hard time motivating people there. Luckily, we have some solutions. So let's start with the second part of our webinar, where we talk about how we can enhance contract lifecycle management, starting with AI. Margot.
Right, thank you. And absolutely right. In all fairness, I did go to a law school. I did complete it with nice grades, and had a passion which was completely killed immediately in one of the large law firms by asking me to copy and paste too much. And then I just, there is definitely a need for a bit more efficiency. And so I came across AI, and I'm really passionate to talk about that because it does help. I know it from firsthand. I've been in that situation where I was asked to copy and paste too much, and so it wasn't fun at all. And so the main reason behind AI and whatever you talked about previously, Moritz, all this tedious work, all this repetitive work where you spend a lot of time on chasing people, doing unnecessarily admin, it's not what you want to do. AI-based contract lifecycle management is the way to use artificial intelligence, those smart tools, to streamline contract lifecycle management, to make it more simple, and to help automate some of the tasks that would traditionally be done manually. And most of you probably are still doing quite a lot by hand and wasting a lot of time on chasing, checking signatures. Moritz, you mentioned very positively final version 2, but I've seen final version 43 before, so that's not what we should be looking at. But there are two things that I want to talk about, and these are expectations. Two aspects of it. One is expectations that come from the business and from clients to you, so internal and external stakeholders that come into legal department that request very quick turnarounds. The work is not shrinking, the work is growing. The complexity isn't becoming downgraded, it is upgrading. A few decades ago, you would not hear of cybersecurity. Now it's very difficult clause to negotiate. Any data protection related, any quick changes, inflation, Russia, LIBOR, IBOR, and any other aspects that happen nowadays globally come into play and create that difficulty, complexity, and increased variety. So expectations coming from externally, and you as lawyers are dealing with that amazingly well and are becoming more and more creative, as this picture exemplifies. I think that's superbly reflecting what's happening now in legal departments, because what you are getting is a lot of pressure from the business, as Moritz mentioned before, but there is also not that enough money to help you, to support you with additional resources. And that's why AI is a helpful tool, and that's why you as lawyers come into us, into Della, Wolters Kluwer, and other vendors to discuss opportunities to help you. However, there is another aspect of expectations that I want to talk to you about, and it's your expectations as lawyers, lawyers who are pressed by the business to achieve maximum efficiency through those tools with limited budgets. But again, I want to come back to what I said previously. You are not gonna get 100% automation. It has to be treated as an assisted tool to help you become more and more effective. But what it really can help with, in the next slide, we've got some examples of what AI-enhanced CLM can actually help you with. So one aspect is definitely to analyze legal documents, whether it's NDAs, DPAs, various MSAs, employment contracts, leases, any data point can be taken out, analyzed for you, and spit out very quickly. And that can save a lot of time, take away pressures from your desk. The next one is to identify key terms. Sometimes, and that's what I'm referring to when I mean copy and paste. How many documents have you had to evaluate for effective date, parties, addresses, and copy that really simple information from one place to another? It is time consuming, it is boring, it's daunting, and anything else. So that's possible with AI. Just with a click of a button. You can do it not only on singular documents, but if you have more documents in play, even thousands, that's possible with a click of a button. Next, extract detailed insight. So outside of identification of key terms, if you need to find details in more complex contracts, whether there is mention of force majeure clause, that's possible. You can also dive deeper. Is pandemic included as part of force majeure clause? Della and other tools can help you extract that information really easily because of that way it learns, it works by looking at multiple examples and extracting that insight for you automatically. Then the next one, the really big one, flagging risks, especially if you work in high risk, high liability organizations, which most of you probably will be, but some interesting example come from constructions or biochemical industries where liabilities are going in millions of pounds, dollars, euros, whatever currency you are using. AI enhanced, CLM enhanced with AI can flag those risks automatically for you. If you want to evaluate any contracts with liability or contract value over 1-2 million, you simply let the machine know and it will extract that for you automatically. And that's only things you need to look at. And automate tasks, that's something we want to get away with or away from typically. We don't want to chase people around when the contract is coming to auto renewal. Let AI notify you of that. Let it tell CLM system that notification needs to be sent automatically to person A and Z. Let it notify you if the signature isn't there yet, so you can chase the right person by just clicking a button, or set it automatically to chase it for you, and so on and so forth. So there is multiple examples of what it can do. But moving on to the next slide, I want to remind you it's an assisted AI tool, and I wanted to use this example. And by the way, it's not Jackson's Pollock art. It is a picture done by one user of AI assisted Hoover or cleaner. Maybe you've heard the story about AI poopocalypse, but hopefully it speaks for itself. It is a story that came because someone fully trusted AI assisted Hoover. And story in brief, you can read it in details, but in brief, a user of such Hoover wanted to have a clean house every morning, and she set it automatically to run for her at 4 a.m. or whatever time to come into a clean ground floor for breakfast with her family. In 99% situations, that was the case. She had a clean house with no need to wake up, spend time on hoovering. But in one instance, unfortunately, a little apocalypse, poopocalypse as it is called, happened. The dog left its stuff around overnight and went unnoticed, and unfortunately spread it around the house. What happened? Disaster when they came in the morning. Why? Because it wasn't fully supervised. And the same with AI. You cannot fully trust it. I personally support this kind of tools. I have one at home and I love it. And I'm planning to invest in automated mop as well, not only Hoover, because it's great. But what happens? I spend 3 minutes to check my surroundings for any cables, any things lying under the bed, pins, hair clips, etc., just to make sure that everything is ready. And then I save 17 minutes on hoovering one room instead of spending 20 minutes pushing a handheld hoover around. So I save huge amount of time, but I still need to supervise it a bit, check my surroundings. And the same with AI. I do want you to come out of this session and remember, you have to come and reset your expectations that it's not going to be all done for you. You have to spend a bit of time, but there will be huge time saving for you, taking away many pressures from the business. And please feel free to read the story later on. But moving on to the next, it's a great story. It's fantastic description, and it can be so nicely presented in the legal industry as well, because it's the same. It's the same. All AI is the same. And a few more use cases. If you start clicking, because I think I set it to this random showcase, but it's not one more, and that's it. So few use cases also to take away, not only the basic aspects such as metadata extractions, flagging risks. There are also multiple other use cases that you can use it on in your own environment. If you need to review historical contracts that are in thousands because the business is going through acquisition, or you are reviewing your inflation contracts regarding inflations, etc. Or you need to extract masses of data just to store it in some system to be easily searchable. You can do data extractions with AI as part of your CLM system. Extract relevant metadata, reduce that administrative tasks on copying and pasting and spending huge resources, maybe sometimes external companies, on doing this work for you. There will be increased accuracy of data and reporting. This is easily searchable data because it will be stored for you in very comprehensive way. And high level of accuracy. AI is very smart. It is going to bring those accurate results to you with a bit of support. And the next is quite interesting, and I think Moritz, you mentioned briefly about that, templates. I know it doesn't sound like a super use case, but I've been going through it myself and looking for the latest templates or a playbook, or what is the final NDA for this and that jurisdiction. Unfortunately, in bigger organization, it is a painful exercise. And I've been speaking with someone who used 900 different templates, 900. I had to actually ask on the call if I've heard it right, because that was the case, unfortunately. And the amount of time saved running back and forth between people in your organization when you have templates all organized either in CLM or AI platform is immense. You don't spend so much time reviewing it for accuracy or comparing and contrasting, because that can all be done as part of AI solution embedded in CLM system, and retain a solid library of templates that's easily, again, accessible and searchable. And finally, I would like you to have a quick glance at this 40-second video of how the process actually looks like when you've got AI enhanced CLM platform. In this case, we're just going through a basic NDA.
Yeah, and here we're looking at the integrated version, right? So this is Della integrated with Legisway. So this is really the case of uploading an external paper contract.
Exactly, and that can be significantly streamlining your process. At the moment, there is a process of extracting data points and ability to search through results that were populated by AI. And no more copy and paste.
As well, right? There's a lot to talk about, but in reality, it's this quick. It's so what we've done now. We've taken a contract, we've scanned it for data. We saw that we had the ability to select outcomes. So the AI was saying, I think it's this thing that you're looking for, but here you can check everything that I found. So you can select the relevant thing. And then it's just data in your system, right? So it's that easy.
Exactly right.
Right. So AI can really add to the efficiency in the contract lifecycle management. We can absolutely see that. But indeed, with the warning from Margot that it does need some supervision, it is the quality of what you put in is also determining the quality of what you put out. But it has gotten to the level where it does seem like magic to an extent, and really it is going to cut down on the amount of manual effort related to these tasks significantly. Another thing that we're going to talk about, that we promised you to talk about, is integrations, and it's really about integrating systems together to automate the processes and to facilitate data flows in an easier way. To explain a little bit about what APIs and integrations are, very basics. I'm not going to get too technical today. For those of you that want to get very technical, feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to explain it in finer detail. And maybe this is also the right moment to give you a quick reminder that when we get to the end of our presentation, there is time for some Q&A. So if you type your questions into the question box, we will see them pop up and we can talk about them when we get to the end. So a little bit about APIs and integrations. And for that, we need to think about communication. Communication is fairly straightforward. I can talk to Margot. Margot and I will understand each other. But if Margot speaks in her native language and if I start speaking in mine, there's a very good chance that we have no clue what the other person is saying, because we don't know those languages. And that is exactly the challenge with connecting two software systems together. These systems will not necessarily speak the same language. So what do you need? You need something in the middle that can act as a common language so that systems can understand each other. And this is not a full technical description. It's not even 100% accurate, but good enough for today. APIs, they can use this common language, JSON is an example, to communicate with each other and transfer data from system A to system B. It's generally a bit more complicated than this, but in the basics, that is what APIs do. APIs provide a common language library to understand what is happening inside the system. So the system can be written in any language that is relevant. As long as the APIs use something more common, then other systems can consume that common language and understand how to translate it back to their own software system. It's just that simple. And when two APIs are talking to each other, that combined is what you would call an integration. So there are several aspects where this can be relevant for legal. So legal departments, they generally start having their own systems to manage all their information in. And one of the examples that we offer is Legisway. And using the APIs, you can then have this connected into the wider ecosystem of business systems within an organization. So think about Salesforce, where your commercial obligations are created by your salespeople. That is something that's relevant for the legal department as well, because these are legal obligations of your organization, so you want to know about that. Dynamics 365 for SAP or ERP systems to exchange vendor information, supplier information, financials around contracts, product codes, or budgets. All of this information is relevant in multiple departments and can therefore be exchanged within these systems. Let me give you some examples. So with Salesforce, for example, I already talked about it a little bit. You can have your sales teams working in Salesforce, happy as they are, doing whatever they're doing. But what you want is that when they get to a closed won scenario, so the deal is completed, the legal obligation is created for your organization, you as a legal team want to have that central oversight. So what we can do is we can automate that process. We can say, okay, using the APIs of Salesforce and the APIs of Legisway, we're going to create an integration that stores these completed contracts automatically in Legisway. And if there's, for example, any comments or specific updates, we can push that information back into Salesforce, effectively cutting down on the workload on the side of duplicating that information from system A to system B by automating that process. Or if you take, for example, Dynamics 365, that can be the place where you have your vendor management happening. That's where your vendors get approved and vetted and you do your KYC checks and everything. But once that's done, you want to have the data synchronized into Legisway so that you can do your contract creation there. You can draft that MSA. And maybe once the framework agreement is created, that data can be pushed back into Dynamics so that you can do your purchase orders and all that other procurement stuff on that side, for example. There are a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different use cases that can be covered. And what I want to give you today is a quick guide, a quick helping guide that will allow you to define whether an integration will make sense for you and to get the definitions on paper so you can go to your vendor of choice, can be us, can be anybody else, to say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. And they will be able to give you a detailed estimate or tell you whether one of their connectors is easily able to handle that. So we created this quick integration starting guide, quick start guide. By just answering a few questions, you can already get to a good idea of what is going to help your organization. For example, maybe the most obvious one, which systems do you want to have integrated? So let's say I want to integrate my legal system with my finance system. What job needs to be done? It's just that simple. Like, what does it need to do? Well, approved vendors need to be stored in my legal system so that we can create contracts with them. Can be the answer. How often does the job need to be done? Now, this is the most important part. We get a lot of questions about automation and integration, where once we start talking about it a bit more, you find out that it's really something that only happens once a month, takes 10 minutes, and is really not that impactful. And this is where we're going to start measuring that impact. So make the time frame small. Don't think about how often you do it in a yearly basis. No, think about how often did I do it last week? Because you remember last week generally. If I ask you the general question, how often per week, you start making it more complicated in your mind. But how often did you do it last week? And then just do that times 52, and it's good enough for an estimation on an annual basis. We're not looking for exact numbers. We just want to understand if there's a difference between, yeah, I'm doing one every month, or there's 25 vendor changes every week. Because 25 vendor changes, that can be time consuming. But we need to understand how much effort does the job take right now. So if we say that it takes around 10 minutes per vendor to manually update that between systems, now suddenly we know, okay, so that's 250 minutes every week. So that's at least 4 hours of work spent just doing this. Now it becomes relevant because now we can start calculating our return on investment. And then one more component to be added, what happens or is the cost if you do the job badly? Right, so maybe for our answer here, if it's done badly, we get unreliable contracts, and unreliable contracts can have all sorts of issues like significant cost or extra time spent in review and negotiation because you simply had the wrong vendor name on top of it, or even worse, a contract with a vendor that isn't actually approved. Then finally, just for sort of the administrative purposes, what data and documents are involved, right? So you kind of want to get the metadata list, like, okay, this is the data that we're looking for, and we want to have any signed contracts, for example. This will give you a good view of what you're going to need for getting started with integrations. So if we combine our two stories together, Margot, so you have your AI enhancements to CLM, and we take integrations on top of it, we kind of come to a new way of doing contract lifecycle management. So we already talked about this more siloed style of contract of CLM, right? But there we saw the inefficiencies with people manually entering data from documents, people synchronizing data between systems manually, people spending a lot of time and a significant effort into review instead of being assisted there. And we now understand that there is really a return on investment in improving these components. So a quick model to help you calculate this for yourself. If we take, for example, the return on investment for integrations, we know that without integrations, if you do 10 minutes per contract and 25 contracts per week, that comes down to 217 averaged out hours per year. And if we take some data from the, back then it was called the IACCM, I think they have a different name these days. They did some research. The average cost of a person involved with contracting is 110 euros per hour. You come down to a total cost of this of 23,833 per year. And if we then look at what that is with integrations, maybe it'll take a minute just to do something, and probably less. So and still 25 contracts per week. So now it's less than 22 hours per year. That gives you a savings already immediately of 21,450 euros on an annual basis. And it's not just a savings in money, it's something that you can spend elsewhere, because this time can be spent on something that is adding more value to your organization. So this is just the start of the return on investment. It's actually much larger. And we can repeat the same for AI, but it gets even better there. right? Because extracting data from documents is a horribly time-consuming process. So if we take roughly the same numbers, we get to a total cost of 520 hours of effort spent on just getting data from documents on an annual basis. So it's 57,000 euros per year. And if we can just cut that down to 3 minutes or 2 minutes per contract, we can get to a savings of almost 50,000 euros on an annual basis. So add that to the integrations part, and we're getting to 75,000-ish, 70,000 saved just by improving these components. And we really think that the next step after just having a digitized contract lifecycle management is to get to a smart contract lifecycle management. A scenario where you still start with your legal repository, but data is fed from other systems within your organization to make sure that you have accurate and up-to-date metadata, so that when you do your drafting, it can easily provide that metadata, or if it's from an external document, it is extracted by the AI with the final review of the lawyer approving that the data points are correct. We do need to take Margot's warnings into consideration here because they are extremely valid for this, making the cycle even easier. And we can already see that we're starting to save lawyers here on the right side, right? So we've rescued 3 lawyers so far from the mundane and the tedious, because one lawyer can now do the review in a much more efficient way because they're assisted by the AI, pointing them to the right clauses and the right risks. Obviously, you're not cutting out an entire person, but it does reduce the total workload of the effort. And if we continue the cycle, I'm not going to go through every single step again, and we get towards the final phase into the management, we can save some more lawyers simply by automating that process of sharing that legal data with the other systems, with the ERP systems there. Really coming to a more enhanced, intelligent contract lifecycle management involving integrations to share data between systems in the organization and AI to reduce the drag of the workload of the mundane and the extraction and the review phases. So with that, we get to the end of our webinar today, and we have some time left, some 8 minutes left for some questions. So looking at the questions box here, I think I have a first question for you, Margot, and it's maybe an obvious one. The question here is, what do you think about ChatGPT and the use in legal?
Let's remember that ChatGPT is taking data points from everywhere, and it's a big mix of all insights and opinions. And it's obviously possible in the long term to utilize it, but within a currently existing offering, that's not a preferred choice, because there is just too much in there for very particular type of job. So at the moment, I would recommend to focus on the narrow options with very focused attention to legal departments and vendors who provide that offering, because the only data that is being fed there and carefully selected is legal contracts, our legal contracts, legal documents, and this is definitely something we want to make sure we do, because the more we see of precise data, the more accurate output we get. So definitely going all in the good direction. To say the same, however, to say another point on that question, it's worth to remember that solutions such as Della within Wolters Kluwer offering is relying on the same idea, asking questions. And what I mentioned before, natural language processing is nothing else but asking a question. Who are the parties to the agreement? How much is the liability cap? What is the address of the property? Is parking allocated to the property? These are simple questions, but if you have a document that's 70 pages long, you don't want to flick through all those pages, but you want to be pointed there. So using that same methodology, asking questions as you would do with ChatGPT.
Yeah, and I think it's also still about just understanding. So it's about the knowledge of the person using it to an extent. To give you an example, and I would invite everybody here to give this a try if you have access to ChatGPT or a similar model. Please play around with it. Be careful. Don't add any information about your customers or your colleagues or names or company names. Understand that you are sharing that information externally, but you're all lawyers, so I'm assuming you're used to that. But try something different. Try and feed it the ingredients from your fridge and ask it to give you a recipe for dinner. It will guaranteed come with a nice recipe, and at least, well, a detailed recipe. But it takes somebody that knows how to cook to understand whether it will be delicious or not. And that is the entire risk with ChatGPT, is that it will give you an answer. It will always give you an answer, unless you ask for something extremely malicious, in which case it will warn you that it's not allowed to give you an answer. And even then there's ways around it. But it requires the knowledge and know-how of the person using it to determine whether that answer is useful and can be used further on. And as such, it is often more used to provide some structure, to say, hey, can you give me a rough overview of the chapters that I need for a good sourcing contract? Something like that. And then you can get sort of a structure, and then you can look at that as a lawyer and understand, oh, okay, I need to order this a little bit, I need to add a couple things, but it'll help you save time in the process. But the output will still only be as good as the person using it in the end. And I think that's an important part. And we're getting to smarter solutions, and it is showing us a better way of how we can interact with these systems, and it's something that we're learning from within Wolters Kluwer as well. But it's definitely something to be very careful with. Looking at the question box, I think we can handle one more question. And this one is around integrations. So they're asking here, so I want to integrate with the Chamber of Commerce. How can I do that? I don't see which Chamber of Commerce, but this is a challenging one in general. Unless you have access to something like Graden or Bureau van Dijk or Bloomberg, that has a sort of more central view of legal entities, or your business is oriented on a single country. This can be quite a challenging exercise, because if you're a multinational organization, you need to do such an integration with 20, 30 different Chamber of Commerce in different countries. And then if you're dealing with Germany or the US, where there's not necessarily a fully centralized repository, it becomes even more complicated. But definitely, yeah, if you want to integrate with the company's house in the UK or the Netherlands, for example, you can these have well-established APIs, and it's quite easy to connect, and then all you need to do, for example, is provide a registration number, and it can automatically extract all the relevant data for those legal entities for you. This can save a ton of time in, I don't know, in contracting, for example, because you'll have the accurate company names, the registered address, registration number, whatever you want to put in the header of your contract, can definitely save time, and you don't have to do it manually, so there's no chance of making mistakes, and it just makes your life easier. But it all starts with which Chamber of Commerce, and is that the only one, and how often are you going to use it, right? So go through that checklist to determine a little bit what makes sense for you there. So with that, I think we're at the end of our webinar today. Margot, I want to thank you so much for helping me out today and talking about AI. I would have been absolutely lost without you. And thank you everyone that attended. If you have any questions or would like to share your thoughts with us, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn or reach out with email. Our address is on the screen. And with that, I want to wish everybody a very happy day. And until the next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.